Imagine a man so rich that he accidentally crashed the entire world economy just by going on a trip. Gold falling from his hands like rainwater, kings trembling at the sound of his name, scholars crossing continents just to be near him. This is not a myth. This is not a legend. This is the factual, documented, true story of Mansa Musa, the richest human being who ever lived. If you have never heard this story before, I promise you, by the end of this video, you will wonder why no one ever taught you this in school. And if you want more stories like this, the forgotten giants of history who shaped the world we live in, hit subscribe right now, because we are just getting started. The year is 1324 AD. In Europe, the Black Death is just decades away. Entire cities are starving. Kings are fighting over small patches of land. The continent is fracturing under the weight of famine, plague, and endless war. But on the other side of the world, deep in the heart of West Africa, something entirely different is happening. There is an empire so large it stretches across what is today Mali, Senegal, Gambia, Guinea, Niger, Nigeria, Chad, and Mauritania. An empire with cities that make the trading posts of medieval Europe look like villages. An empire so wealthy that scholars who visited it struggled to find words to describe what they saw. This is the Mali Empire, and at the height of its power, historians estimate that it produced more than half of the world's entire gold supply. Not a large share, not a significant portion. More than half of all the gold in the entire known world flowed through this one empire. The ruler of this empire held a title that said everything about his status. He was called the Mansa. In the Mandinka language, that word means king of kings, not just a ruler, not just a warlord. A king above all other kings, a man whose power had no visible ceiling. But before we get to the man who would take this empire and burn his name into the memory of the entire world, we need to understand how this empire was born. Because the Mali Empire did not begin in gold, it began in blood. Nearly a century before Mansa Musa, there was a boy named Sundiata Keita. According to the griot oral tradition, the storytellers who preserved West African history for centuries, Sundiata was born into the Mandinka people around 1217 AD. His father was a king, but Sundiata's early life was defined not by power but by weakness. As a child, he could not walk. His legs refused to carry him. The royal court laughed at him. His enemies dismissed him entirely. Those enemies were the Soso people, led by a warrior king named Sumanguru Kante. Sumanguru was feared across the region. He had conquered the Mandinka, looted their cities, and killed 11 of Sundiata's brothers. He believed the Mandinka were finished. He was wrong. Sundiata trained in secret. He built alliances with neighboring kings. He grew strong. And then in 1235 AD, at the Battle of Kirina, one of the most consequential battles in all of African history, Sundiata led a coalition army against Sumanguru Kante and shattered his empire entirely. The Soso Empire collapsed. The Mali Empire rose in its place. Sundiata became the first Mansa, the first king of kings. Over the following decades, the Mali Empire expanded. It swallowed trade routes. It absorbed gold mines. It grew in wealth, size, and global influence, but it still had not reached its peak. That would take another 100 years, and it would take one man, with a vision unlike anything the medieval world had ever seen. Mansa Musa came to the throne around 1312 AD, and his rise to power begins with one of history's strangest mysteries. His predecessor was a man named Abu Bakr II. Abu Bakr II was reportedly obsessed with one question: what lay on the other side of the Atlantic Ocean? He wanted to know what was out there, beyond the horizon. So he organized an expedition, 2,000 boats, a crew of thousands. He stocked them with food, water, and gold. Then he sailed west and never came back. No wreckage was ever found. No survivors ever returned. The entire fleet simply vanished. To this day, historians debate whether Abu Bakr II reached the Americas more than a century before Columbus. There is no definitive answer. What is certain is that Musa was left on shore, holding an empire he had not expected to rule. Mansa Musa was a deeply religious man. He was a devout Muslim. He was highly educated, a passionate reader, a patron of poetry and architecture and Islamic scholarship. He was, by multiple contemporary accounts, charismatic, generous, and politically sharp. The empire he now controlled was extraordinary. His capital city of Niani was a sophisticated metropolis. His trading city of Timbuktu was already one of the most important centers of commerce and learning in the world. His territory contained the Bambuk and Bure gold fields, the richest known gold deposits on Earth at that time. He also controlled the great Tagaza salt mines, and at this point in history, salt was valued as highly as gold itself. Mansa Musa had everything, but he was about to do something with it that the world had never seen before and would never fully recover from. In 1324 AD, Mansa Musa announced his intention to perform the Hajj, the Islamic pilgrimage to the holy city of Mecca. For a Muslim ruler, this was a religious duty. It was expected. It was routine. Mansa Musa's Hajj was not routine. He began assembling his entourage. First came the royal court, advisors, ministers, diplomats, then soldiers, then historians and poets, then servants and slaves. The numbers grew and grew. According to Arab historian Al-Umari, who interviewed members of the Egyptian court shortly after the journey, the total entourage numbered 60,000 people. 60,000. Then came the gold. 500 slaves marched in the procession. Each one carried a staff made of solid gold. Each staff weighed approximately 4 pounds. Then came the camels. Between 80 and 100 camels, each loaded with 300 pounds of gold dust. Musa himself rode on horseback, surrounded by a personal guard and an ocean of silk banners and golden ornaments. This was the single largest movement of gold in the history of the medieval world, all of it belonging to one man. The caravan crossed 4,000 miles of Saharan desert. Wherever Musa stopped, he gave. He gave gold to the poor. He gave gold to the villages along the route. He paid for new mosques to be built. He handed out gold to anyone who approached him with a need. His generosity was not calculated charity. It was simply the natural behavior of a man for whom the concern of running out had never once crossed his mind. Then the caravan reached Cairo, Egypt. The Sultan of Egypt at the time was Al-Nasir Muhammad. He sent an invitation for Musa to visit him. This created an immediate diplomatic problem. Musa was Mansa, king of kings. He did not bow before other rulers. After considerable negotiation, a compromise was reached. Musa would meet the Sultan, but without performing the formal bow of submission. The Sultan agreed. He had heard enough about this man and his gold that he was willing to bend protocol. In Cairo, Musa's generosity exploded on an unprecedented scale. He purchased goods from Cairo's merchants. He commissioned construction projects. He gave gold freely to Cairo's population. He handed out gifts to foreign diplomats. He spent and spent and spent for several months. And then something began to happen that no one had anticipated. The gold market in Cairo began to collapse. Musa had flooded the Egyptian economy with so much gold so quickly that the value of gold itself fell dramatically. Prices for basic goods rose sharply in response. Merchants who had based their businesses on the stable price of gold found their calculations destroyed overnight. According to Egyptian scholar Al-Maqrizi, writing decades later, the Cairo gold market did not recover for 12 full years. Mansa Musa, the most generous man of his era, had caused an economic catastrophe entirely by accident. What happened next is even more remarkable. On the return journey from Mecca, Musa reportedly recognized what he had done. In an attempt to repair some of the damage, he began borrowing gold back from Cairo's merchants at high interest rates, deliberately removing gold from circulation to slow the inflation he had caused. A man so wealthy he had broken a regional economy, now trying to fix it by going into debt. The Arab world was electrified. Accounts of Musa's journey spread quickly across the Islamic world, across North Africa, and soon reached the trading networks that connected to Europe. European cartographers who had drawn sub-Saharan Africa as a blank space of mythical creatures and desert suddenly revised their maps. On the Catalan Atlas of 1375, one of the most important maps of the medieval world, a seated king appears in West Africa, holding a large gold orb. The inscription beside him reads, "This king is the richest and most distinguished ruler of this whole region owing to the great quantity of gold that is found in his lands." The entire known world now knew the name Mansa Musa. Mansa Musa returned from his Hajj not just with religious merit, he returned with the most valuable cargo imaginable. He brought back the greatest scholars, architects, and intellectuals the Islamic world had to offer. Among those who returned with him was Abu Ishaq al-Sahili, a celebrated poet and architect from Granada in modern-day Spain. Musa commissioned al-Sahili to redesign and expand Timbuktu. What followed was a transformation that turned a prosperous trading city into one of the architectural and intellectual wonders of the 14th century world.
The Jingareba Mosque was constructed in 1327 AD under al-Sahili's design, funded directly by Mansa Musa, at a reported cost of £200 of gold. It still stands today. It is a UNESCO World Heritage Site. Centuries of rain, wind, and sun have weathered its mud brick walls, but the building endures, a direct physical monument to what Musa built. Timbuktu also became home to the University of Sankore. At its peak, this institution enrolled approximately 25,000 students, in a city of roughly 100,000 people. A quarter of the entire population was studying. The curriculum covered Islamic law, mathematics, astronomy, history, medicine, and literature. The libraries of Timbuktu held an estimated 1 million manuscripts, 1 million written documents, covering science, philosophy, theology, poetry, and governance, produced and preserved in an African city, while Europe was still centuries away from its own renaissance. Under Mansa Musa, Mali did not just dominate the world in gold, it dominated it in knowledge. No empire is immune to time, and the forces that would eventually dismantle Mali were already assembling during Musa's own reign. To the north, Berber and Tuareg nomadic groups continuously raided Mali's northern trade routes through the Sahara. The sheer size of the empire, stretching thousands of miles, made it extraordinarily difficult to defend at its borders. Musa could build mosques and universities, but he could not be everywhere at once. Mansa Musa died around 1337 AD. The exact date and cause are not precisely recorded. What is recorded is what happened next. His sons and successors could not hold the empire together with the same skill he had. Succession disputes fractured the royal court. Rival claimants to the throne weakened central authority. The efficient system of governance Musa had maintained began to break down at the edges. To the east, the Songhai people, who had long been subjects of the Mali Empire, began to assert their independence. Under leaders like Sunni Ali, the Songhai Empire expanded aggressively. By 1468, the Songhai had captured Timbuktu itself, the crown jewel of everything Mansa Musa had built. By the end of the 15th century, the Mali Empire had shrunk to a fraction of its former size. The gold and salt trades shifted, the great libraries were scattered, the University of Sankore fell into disrepair. And yet, here is the haunting detail. European maps continued to draw Mansa Musa on the African continent well into the 1400s. Long after the empire had fragmented, cartographers across Europe still pictured a great king in West Africa, holding gold. Because to the outside world, the image of Mali's wealth had become permanently fixed. The reality had changed. The legend had not. The question that every person who hears this story eventually asks is, how rich was Mansa Musa in today's money? Economists and historians have attempted to calculate this. The most widely cited estimate, published by Celebrity Net Worth and referenced by multiple academic sources, places his wealth at approximately $400 billion. Some estimates run even higher. For comparison, at the time of writing, Elon Musk, widely considered the wealthiest living person, has a net worth estimated at around $300 billion.
Jeff Bezos sits around 250 billion, Bill Gates around 130 billion. Mansa Musa's estimated wealth exceeds all three of them combined, but raw numbers still don't capture the full picture. At the height of his reign, the Mali Empire produced more than 50% of the Old World's gold supply and controlled the majority of its salt trade. Gold and salt were not luxury goods in the medieval world. They were the foundation of entire economies. Musa didn't just own wealth, he controlled the raw material from which other people's wealth was made. Historians at Time magazine, in a 2015 study, concluded that Mansa Musa's wealth was so extreme that it is effectively impossible to put a precise modern figure on it. The economic systems were too different, the scale too vast. What they could say with certainty was this: there has been no individual in any era of recorded human history who has come close to the level of economic dominance that Mansa Musa held at his peak. So if Mansa Musa was the richest person in human history, if his empire was one of the most advanced civilizations of the medieval world, why is he not in every history textbook? Why do most people live their entire lives without ever hearing his name? The answer is not a mystery. It is a documented pattern. When European colonial powers began systematically occupying Africa in the 19th century, a particular narrative was useful to them. The narrative was this: Africa had no great civilizations. Africa had no history worth recording. Africa was a continent of peoples who had achieved nothing,
built nothing, and contributed nothing to human progress. This narrative justified conquest. It justified enslavement. It justified extraction. The problem was that the evidence against this narrative was sitting right there, in the libraries of Timbuktu, in the Arabic accounts of Musa's Hajj, in the Catalan Atlas, in the oral traditions of the Mandinka griot historians. So that evidence was ignored, dismissed, left untranslated, left unstudied. The manuscripts of Timbuktu, more than 800,000 of which survived centuries of neglect, war, and deliberate destruction, are only now, in the 21st century, being systematically digitized and studied. Many are written in Arabic. Many have still never been fully translated. They represent one of the largest surviving archives of medieval scholarship in the world. The history of Mansa Musa was never truly lost. It was simply hidden from certain people, for specific reasons, for a very long time. That is beginning to change. Scholars across Africa, Europe, and North America are rebuilding the historical record. The story is coming back, and the world is slowly beginning to understand that the greatest empire of the 14th century was not in Europe. It was in Mali, and the greatest ruler of that era was not an English king, or a French monarch, or a German emperor. It was a man in West Africa who walked across the Sahara carrying more gold than the entire continent of Europe had ever seen. The Jingareba Mosque that Mansa Musa commissioned in 1327 AD still stands in Timbuktu today. Its mud brick walls are rebuilt and maintained by the local community, using traditional techniques passed down through generations. It is a UNESCO World Heritage Site. It has survived nearly 700 years. In the early 2000s, when political instability threatened the manuscripts of Timbuktu, Malian families, some of whom had secretly protected these ancient documents for centuries, hiding them from invaders and looters in their homes and underground cellars, brought them forward. Hundreds of thousands of manuscripts were transported to safety in Bamako, Mali's capital, in a quiet and extraordinary act of historical preservation. The name Mali itself, the nation that exists on the map today, is a direct inheritance from the empire that Sundiata Keita built and Mansa Musa made immortal. The culture, the music, the oral traditions of the Mandinka people carry his story forward to this day. Mansa Musa never sought validation from outside his world. He did not need it. His mosques still stand. His city still breathes. The manuscripts of his empire are still being read. And 700 years after his death, his story remains, factually, verifiably, undeniably, the most extraordinary story of wealth, power, generosity, and civilization that most of the world has never heard. That was the untold history of Mansa Musa, Africa's richest king, the most powerful ruler of the medieval world, and proof that history is far bigger, far richer, and far more extraordinary than what most of us were ever taught. If this story moved you even a little, share it, because this is the kind of history that deserves to be heard by millions of people. Subscribe if you haven't already, because every single week we dig up the stories that history tried to forget. The next one is already waiting for you. Click here, and I will see you there.